right. Awesome. Thank you.
Hi everybody, great to be here and see everybody. My name is Michelle Cobell. I've had 2 kids currently in the program and going through sorry. I have a son, CJ, who spent 2 years in the part-time preschool program, and a daughter, Alana Gray, who's in the, I'm blanking on the Spruce, sorry. Who's in Spruce, and she's been there for this year, so nice to see everybody.
Hi everyone, I'm Billy Hughes. I have 2 kids at the Queen Anne Hilltop location. Waverly is in Raindrop, and there's your teachers. And Oliver is in Mountain Room. This is his 2nd year. He was in a different classroom, Master Garden, and obviously pregnant. So she's on the waiting list as well. So yeah, nice to see everybody's face.
Hi everyone, my name is Darcy Reef. I have a Hilltop alum. My son David was at Hilltop. He's now in 1st grade, so he's been out for a couple of years. And then my youngest son Sam is at Hilltop right now. He is in the garden room. And so we've got a couple more years with Sam in the program. I'm also on the Hilltop Board of Directors, so I've been volunteering at the Board of Directors for coming up on 4 years now as well.
Hi, I'm Hoda Parvin. I have a son in Mountain Room. He's been here 6-7 months. I think it started last year. And I have another one joining in September, just got his name. And the next is 1.5. So he's, I don't know which class, but I'm super happy he got in. And we are Persian, so it's our New Year this week, so Happy New Year.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Lauer. I have an older daughter, Meryl, who's a Hilltop alum. She's now in 1st grade. And then I have Holmes, who's in Sunlight Room.
Awesome. Thank you guys. So I'm just going to go around and just ask you guys some questions. I got a chance to send them to you all. I'm not sure if you guys have a chance to read them. They shouldn't be too invasive, but if at any point you guys feel like, hey, maybe you can skip that question, let me know. I totally can, okay? So why don't we start with Michelle, since you're right here, and I just copied and pasted the questions into this document here. So one of the things that we were curious about was your perspective having 2 different children in our program. I know they've both only been at Fremont. But can you tell us a little bit about maybe your experience with CJ when he was originally in Maple Room, and then compared now to with Alana and all her experiences, and what your perspective is on having 2 different children here? And I feel like Fremont was a lot different when CJ was here, and then maybe if you can just kind of share with us some of the changes that you've noticed as well.
Yeah, sure. I think maybe importantly too, the consistencies. I think from the reason why we've stayed and why Allie has joined the program as well is because there have been some consistencies that are so important and critical to our values and emblematic of what Hilltop stands for. And I think the first one is just the quality of teachers. All of you are so incredible. And every time there was change, of which I think CJ had 2 or 3 different sets of teachers, and I see some of you across the room. Every time it was a little nerve-wracking, but then immediately very comforting because it was so clear the quality was there. The second was we transitioned from a highly structured Montessori program to Hilltop, and it was just so refreshing to allow him to be in an environment to see his full potential and kind of find who he was as an individual. So that freedom, that child-led approach, that Reggio Emilia curriculum was just really clearly evident across all of the different teachers and cycles, including Allie's. The third was just the commitment to social emotional learning, which was a really big critical piece for us, and so effectively done in so many different styles, and that was really appreciated as well. And then the fourth was just a commitment to community and to becoming a good citizen and to educating them about, hard topics. And that's something that I haven't consistently seen across other preschools, and something I really value and appreciate from all of you. So there were stylistic differences, there were communication differences, there were, but all in all, I would say I've been struck at the quality and kind of consistency at the core things I was really looking for. So a little bit of confusion around the introduction of the Seattle Public Preschool Program, SPP, and how that works and what the difference between the SPP program and the non-SPP program and slightly different prices. And frankly, I was just looking for like a certain program in Fremont in a certain time of day. Didn't even know who the teachers would be, but had full faith that they would be quality. And I think that's an opportunity maybe to help clarify that, like for parents making that decision. What is the difference? Why is there a slight price difference? I wasn't sure if the teachers would be sourced from other places or not, and so we were taking a little bit of a leap, but had faith that Hilltop would, continue to be the great school that it was. So hopefully that helps. SPP, maybe to jump into the next question or two, SPP is, I think, introduced more diversity, but I would love to validate that with the administrators and understand, like, has that come to be or not? It feels that way, yep. And so that's been a really amazing kind of value add in Allie's experience versus CJ's as well. I can see kind of a much more diverse set of backgrounds. So yeah, I think it's been a richer experience. So.
Thank you so much. Like you mentioned about SPP, it is a state and city funded program, so you do get a diverse group of children that enter our program. I think now it's a lot different than when CJ first started and kind of what it's become. I think we are an exception to SPP curriculum, which they do require a different type of curriculum for SPP. So I'm wondering, because I heard you say that some of the core qualities that you were looking for was, maybe straying away a little bit from the more structured Montessori and into more emergent curriculum and some more, Reggio approach. How would you feel if maybe curriculum changed? Not that it would completely move away from emergent or Reggio, but how would you feel if another curriculum was added to kind of appease SPP when it comes to the contract? Because they have a couple of different curriculums that they require in order for us to get a contract for them. I am wondering, how would you feel if there was a slight deviation from maybe some Reggio?
I think it's a hard question to answer without it being really real about what those curriculum changes are. If it's, a greater focus on letters and math and reading or other things like that, I'd welcome that, but not at the expense of kind of the freedom that they have to date. So it's kind of a fine balance, and I know that all of you know way more about this than I do. So I look to Hilltop to kind of help identify the right path and still keep the core identity of the school, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I think at our core, we are guided by our values and our mission statement, and that's something that we always continue to just stay true to and align everything that we do with it. But at the same time, it's one of the things that I think is hard for Hilltop as an organization to think differently, right? Because it is so rooted in its tradition of Reggio and emergent curriculum that when anything else is introduced, I sometimes do feel a little bit of tension, not necessarily, non-compliance for lack of a better word, but just a little bit of tension of people feel that a little bit of what they joined for might change or go away from. And I understand that, that might be not why you joined Hilltop. So that's one of the questions I wanted to ask now, because as we start to kind of look at different things, I do wonder how that's going to affect our families, especially those that chose to come here for curriculum and some of those approaches that we do educationally. And then I also wanted to mention too, you said specifically that you wanted to come to Hilltop because of its location in Fremont. How likely would it be for you to follow Hilltop, let's say if it didn't have a Queen Anne or a Fremont location? Would it be something that you still, would you still seek us if we were a little bit further away or maybe a little bit less close to home?
Well, I will just say if the curriculum does change on SPP quite significantly, I think this goes without saying, but the communicating that to parents early and soon and before decisions are made, obviously, is just so valuable and would be so appreciated, because it's not something I necessarily knew last year very clearly, and I haven't really felt it this year, so it hasn't been an issue, but if significant changes did happen. I would be willing to follow Hilltop maybe up to, a few miles away.
Sure.
But I will say, like, convenience as a working mom, and my husband works, it's just everything, as so. Yeah, and Queen Anne would be fine. It's not a preference for Fremont versus Queen Anne, so, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any plans to change anything, but, I am curious just to see, just so we can kind of start thinking about different things, and I think we really just want to continue to honor our parents and our families who have been with us, so it's something that, we would like to include them in with these conversations. And then, another thing too that you mentioned was about kind of the academic structure that you would appreciate. Is it something that you are looking for, or is it something that is more of an enrichment when it comes to, the more traditional, math learning and literature and things like that? I think that Hilltop focuses more on social emotional learning, and that's probably at the highest of the tier, for lack of a better term. But if there was maybe a little bit more emphasis on the other two, how would you feel about that as a parent?
I mean, I'd welcome it. Again, not at the expense of the amazing curriculum and programming now, but maybe in a creative way to identify like opportunities. I think it does happen. It's just not consistent or systematic. I did see a little bit of a difference across teachers of like emphasis on those components versus not. I personally agree with the relative priority rank of like social emotional and all of that versus, getting down to kind of more structured reading and writing and all of that, but it's always helpful in preparation for kindergarten.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Which I'm glad you bring it up. It brings me to my next question. How well would you say that CJ is prepared for kindergarten? And are there some things that you wish maybe you would have learned during his time at Hilltop that maybe you see now is becoming more prevalent in his life?
We decided not to put CJ into kindergarten this year, not because he wasn't ready, but just to give him another year of like play and freedom and openness and learning himself. And so I would say he was ready for kindergarten. We talked to his teachers a lot about whether or not he should go into kindergarten, and they fully encouraged us. And I think the best part about it was before at the Montessori program, he really was kind of inside of himself, and then he came to Hilltop and he really found himself, and he was confident in himself, and he learned to love, and he learned to kind of self-direct what he is interested in. And so in all of those ways, I think he was very ready, and also from a social emotional, getting along with kids, cooperating, communicating, all of that was really, really, he was really ready.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I also wanted to mention as well that, with COVID, children lost 2 years of schooling, right? So I think a lot of the questions we get now from parents and a lot of the topics that we get now as educators is, are children ready for kindergarten? And I think the standard has changed, right? Even kindergarten teachers now, having conversations with them will let us know, like, hey, it's not the same, kindergarten now as it was 2 years ago. Just developmentally, everybody's kind of back behind 2 years. Which is one thing that Seattle Public Schools is taking into consideration, and they are saying they are ready for kindergarten because kindergarten is different now, right? So I do appreciate you mentioning that, because that is one of the biggest kind of concerns that parents have now, of like, they don't think their children are ready, and that might be so, but that's one thing that I feel like we should all kind of be mindful of, is that the standard has changed, and now what we thought was ready for kindergarten is not necessarily, the same thing, which means kindergarten now just has a tougher task at hand, and that is, getting them ready for first grade with a lot less time. So I think it's something to definitely consider when, considering kindergarten. Thank you, Michelle. Now over to Billy. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, you have 2 different children at our different site, Queen Anne, one in our toddler program, and then one in a mountain room. Can you share your experience of, both of their different experiences in each classroom?
Sure, yeah. well, I think it's like inherently going to be different because they're two different kids, two different personalities, two different ages. So if they were the same, I think that'd be really weird. But yeah, I think both of them have been equally really positive. Oliver this year has it's been such a positive year, and I see his teachers over here, and I just really appreciate the work that they've done to get to know him and to just kind of like meet him where he is, because he's kind of a lot of places, bouncing all over the place. So I really, like he's really energetic. And I really appreciate how his teachers have really dug in and been like, okay, these are your strengths, and these are, like bringing those to us, because we see our kids in such a different light, right? Like we see them in a totally different environment. And so I think that experience for him has just been so great, like so great this year. And similarly with Waverly, she turned 2 in December. And there was a little turnover in her, in the teachers in her classroom. And I feel like we've really settled in now. Like Tia has been there for the whole time, and she's just like, they have like a little bond, I don't know. But she's, forming these bonds with her new teachers, and it's been great. And I really appreciate, similarly to Oliver's experience, Waverly's teachers are really thinking about like, okay, this is where she is. These are some areas where I need some support. And that has been so wonderful. And we've been working through some of those things. It's just been a really positive experience for us this year. Yeah. Do you need this one?
You can totally keep that. Can you guys hear me okay back there? Feel official with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I really appreciate about your children is kind of their curious wonder, for lack of a better word. I'm going to stop saying that because they're
I do think that's...
Right?
Yes.
How would you say that Hilltop has kind of like cultivated that and maybe enriched that a little bit?
I think it's really supportive. So Oliver, a lot of times when I'm like, buddy, that's just like, let's really, do you think that's the right thing to do? I'm just so curious, Mom. Like, yeah, you are, but that's not like a reason to like not listen. But I appreciate, that's like one of his best qualities. And I do think that has really blossomed with support. And finding the ways to really celebrate that curiosity within like the bounds of like still being appropriate and still like teaching him how to be like a person that can be successful in the world and kind and not out of control. And so yeah, I think like that structure within the classroom, like allowing some lots of freedom, but within really clear boundaries, right? Like this is the consequence if you don't do that, and that's communicated. It's like very controlled, very clear, and I appreciate that rather than just kind of like letting him make decisions about his own curiosity, because he will clearly do that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's funny, I remember when Oliver first got his hair cut, for some reason I was like, oh no, he's gonna be so different, and like, he was still the same Oliver, and I was like, oh yeah, haircut or not, he's the same kiddo, and the same with Waverly. To me, it's a joy to see her walk down the hall, and like, you could just kind of see her thought process almost. It's, she's walking, they're transitioning outside, and she'll stop and she'll stare at something, and you can kind of see the gears turning in her head, and then it's like, okay, come on, Waverly, and then she kind of stops, she collects herself, and then she goes on to the next thing, and now she's looking at, whether we have something set up in the lobby, and it's like, she has she has millions of thoughts, so you can kind of just see her little brain just kind of going through. Another thing I wanted to ask you is, you had Oliver first at Hilltop, and then Waverly joined us. What made you decide to join Hilltop in the first place?
We did a lot of research before, so we're relatively new. I mean, it feels with COVID, it feels like we're relatively new to Seattle. We've been here 2.5 years. We did a lot of research because New York is just different. We came from New York City, and it's just like a totally different thing, like in so many ways. And I think the thing that was most attractive about Hilltop for us was like a lot of what you were saying, Michelle, like the philosophies, the teaching program, Emilio Reggio, but also just like the focus on advocacy and having difficult conversations in an age-appropriate way. Like, we support that at home, but it's different coming from your parents. And so I just totally appreciate that specific thing. The commitment to diversity, the conversations about race. I just think like all of those things are unique and really important for us as a family, because that's how we're trying to teach our kids, that's how we're living our life. But, you know, we're also living in a world that isn't necessarily totally supportive of that, or even aware of lots of those things. And so, yeah, those are like the biggest sort of pieces, in addition to what Michelle was talking about.
Thank you for sharing that. That's something that, you know, drew me to Hilltop when I decided to work here. And it's honestly one of the biggest kind of points of conflict with some families, because some families feel that children aren't necessarily equipped to handle those conversations, right? And I think as educators, we do a very good job of being able to, you know, scaffold those conversations with them and making sure that they are at a very, you know, developmentally appropriate level, because they're really big conceptual kind of conversations, right? And at the same time, I really appreciate us as an organization being willing to kind of live in that discomfort and, you know, continue to have them, even at the risk of, you know, maybe some families withdrawing. So it does bring comfort to know that some families choose us for that reason. You know, one thing I've heard in the past is Hilltop has an agenda, and then this is a question for everybody. Would you guys feel that Hilltop has an agenda or something in particular that they're trying to push when it comes to these bigger conceptual topics?
I mean, maybe, but like, those conversations are important. So, I mean, for our family. So I feel like that might be a criticism, but my background, my professional background is a social worker, and so I feel like I've heard that sort of criticism, like professional career about, oh, you have an agenda, or you're trying to make us think a certain way. Well, yeah, because that's what we agree with. Like, that's what we want. We're hoping that our kid, my husband and I are hoping that our kids will be aware and be compassionate and be knowledgeable about these things that are really important and are not necessarily mainstream, right? Like, which is like, God, it's 2023. Like, how can it not be mainstream? But that's our sort of feeling about it. So yeah, you're right. You're probably, I mean, any sort of institution is not going to please everyone, but then that's sort of also like life. Like, you choose things that align with what you're trying to achieve, and that's what we've done with Hilltop.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, one of the things that's hard for parents to grasp, especially now, is that these conversations are crucial, but, you know, the reward isn't seen right away, right? It's until they're older and they become these global citizens that we see how our community is uplifted, because, you know, the children who were, you know, young, responsible children who were able to kind of, you know, treat everybody in a very, you know, inclusive way. You know, even in our community, we see, you know, the encampments that pop up. Children see these things and they have questions, right? And rather than shy away from, you know, the conversation, we do have particular lessons that some of our educators have done, and in particular, you know, Cloud Room, who does, you know, they clean up the canal, our, you know, Spruce Room, who does all these bigger, you know, food drives and all these things that our children are able to see, that I think in the long run is able to kind of show that, you know, we're all a big global community, and this is a way to, you know, uplift each other, even though you might not see the result right away. Thank you, Billy.
I do think that's really important also, because, you know, like, having those conversations, and I've said this before, I think, to Oliver's teachers, but having those conversations about some of these really difficult kind of like potentially, I don't know, could be scary. These, you know, big, like you said, you know, they're huge kind of like global issues. But having those conversations just kind of frankly and without shame, and opening like the door for an opportunity to talk about or ask questions, I think that's super unique, because you do see a lot of situations where kids are like, oh, shh, don't say that, that's like totally not appropriate. But like that also then creates like this shameful sort of experience for a child. And I think that that's totally addressed. At least in my experience this year, I've seen that just totally addressed and opened up.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I mean, I think that's kind of the first step, right, is having those conversations. But like I said, it is challenging because people have so many different, values and ideas, that in order for us to kind of be aligned, we kind of just have to commit to this, discomfort and just get through it. So I appreciate you guys mentioning that. You guys appreciate it. And then we're going to move on to Darcy now. So Darcy, your perspective is a little unique because you do sit on the board. So I do want to hear from you and kind of just, your perspective as a parent, one, and also as a board member, and how kind of, you pick and choose, I guess, certain things, because one thing I will say about you as a board member is that I don't necessarily see you, kind of interject your power, for lack of better words, in the classroom, which I really appreciate. But can you share your perspective, one as a parent, as a board member?
Sure. So we've had wonderful experiences in the program as parents, and then our children as well. We've always had such loving, caring teachers over the years, and that's really what I think drew us to Hilltop was just seeing how long teachers stick around. Like the retention rates are so good at Hilltop compared with other, just daycares that we've experienced before. So we've had fantastic experiences as a family in the program. The board is different. So I've been on the board for coming up on 4 years. I joined the board in the fall of 2019, which is the same time that Darlene came into the organization, and that was pre-COVID. And then COVID hit and things got real bad. Just to summarize it short, quickly. So I have seen the struggles that happened here at this organization, and felt fear at times, like, oh my gosh, is this going to, is this the end of Hilltop? It was tough, the things that were going on here, but also I think all across the ECE community, everybody was facing these challenges. And I can remember at times, just at social activities, talking with other parents who would be kind of complaining about some of the changes at Hilltop during the pandemic. And it's like, yeah, but these things are necessary. We have to do what's best for the children, but also what's best for the staff who are here. And there are two perspectives. And so trying to kind of walk that fine line and explain it without going into detail with parents about all the, just how the sausage is made, basically. So it can be, when you're on the board and when we're in our board meetings, you have to wear your board hat, not your parent hat. It's really hard sometimes, those lines get blurred, and you kind of think oh, these changes, how are these going to affect my child? But you do have to maintain that distance as well, and say all right, this is the right decision for the organization. Kids are adaptable. My older son, pre-pandemic, I stressed so much about changes in his life, taking him from his daycare to Hilltop, or moving from one classroom to another. But then COVID hit, so many things changed, and honestly, he just sailed through. He was fine. Our kids can handle change, and I think that's partly because they feel love and support at Hilltop, and they know that oh, okay, maybe there's a new teacher coming in, but it's still a Hilltop. We're still going to have fun every day. So it's been a good experience. I feel like I'm meandering around, but did I answer your question?
Yeah, you definitely did. Can I ask, what are the topics or maybe the times where you find it the hardest to maybe keep your two hats separated, right? Is there a particular topic that comes up during board meetings that you're I really, really want to vote because, Sam is in Garden? What are those times that you feel the most conflicted?
So I'm a treasurer, and so I'm very intimately familiar with Hilltop's finances, and I know that, no one makes money running a preschool. It's not a particularly profitable endeavor. So seeing, conversations like every year we talk about how much tuition is going to increase, and I am personally affected by that. But at the same time, like, we got to take care of our staff. We've got to afford the supplies that we need for the school. And so it's, I try to just be a board member in those conversations and think like, yes, this is the fiscally right thing that we should be doing for the organization. And yeah, I'll have to pay a couple $100 more a month, but that's fine. You sort of expect that as a parent. So those ones are always a bit of a challenge. I've been with the organization long enough to see all the, just for lack of a better term, just the crap that we deal with in Queen Anne, like being in a basement unit, the floods that happen, the plumbing backups that happen, and it is incredibly frustrating as a parent when you have to like immediately find, emergency childcare for your kid, but at the same time, it's like, all right, we're bored, we gotta work together, like what do we do to fix this? How do we amend our leases? How do we consider, better locations where perhaps we could run the program instead of, you guys have done beautiful work making the inside space inviting, but it's a basement, so it would be nice to have a location that's a little bit sunnier and cheerier. So those are some of the examples.
Yeah, thank you. I think, I think as somebody who works at Hilltop, I hear you, right? I think ideally we'd have our own kind of, campus that's just ours, right? I think the location itself is something that is challenging just because Queen Anne is so special to Hilltop, right? Even the name Hilltop, it started at the top of the hill. And that's something that I want to continue to honor, but at the same time, it's so hard because we do have to be at the mercy of, landowners and all these different kind of, property managers. And it does suck sometimes when you have no choice but to be like, well, we don't have the space. And then similarly with the canal being right down, our street, there's so many different rules that we have to follow, but at the same time, it is something that I know our staff really values and our families really value as far as, being able to be part of nature and kind of a part of this big Seattle kind of staple, which I think is awesome. I wanted to ask you too, having two different children, at Hilltop, would you say that your experience has been consistent across both children? And similarly, do you think your son, David, was prepared by Hilltop to go to kindergarten?
Yeah, so in some ways it's been very different, our experience, because David was pre-COVID and Sam was post-COVID. So just kind of the things that were normal for David don't necessarily exist the same way for Sam. Like I can remember when David was in school, like we'd go to pick him up and you would just hang out in the classroom for like 30 minutes just chatting with the teachers or watching the kids play. They might be engaged in something with someone else and you just sit there and be like, oh, that's so cute. And now you feel more of a pressure to just kind of grab your kids and hustle them out. There's not as many staff in the classroom at the end of the day as there used to be. So it's just a little bit different, but I get it. I understand why that is. But I would say the experience that my kids have has been very consistent. I mean, they still come home with, well, it's kind of hard to get stories out of Sam because he says he didn't do anything during school. I'll prod him with questions, and then he'll tell me a little bit more about like what he saw walking on the canal or who he sat next to at lunchtime. So I think they're both having they've both had very enjoyable experiences there. With David, he was our first child, so we were like first-time parents, and coming into Hilltop, I can remember in that first week, the teachers had him pouring his own cups of water to drink, and I'm just looking at my child, I'm like, you're 2.5 years old, you can pour water? Like, I had no idea, because I still babied him, like, I didn't think he was capable of these sorts of things, but he learned so much independence from Hilltop. Now, as a second-time parent, it's like, okay, I kind of know Sam can do more because he sees his big brother and he learns from him. So, but still, the independence is there. Like it's the emergent curriculum. It's the letting the kids kind of explore and find their own path and determine what sort of things they want to focus on because this is the game that's fun for them this week. So that has not changed. it's the administrative stuff that's changed a little bit, but I do not think that has been detrimental to our experience at all.
Thank you. As an admin person, I'm a little biased. I did want to say too, something that's, maybe you don't even know, but Michelle, wonderful Michelle Sanders is joining the garden team as a support educator. I wanted to ask what your experience was having, some different support educators in there this past year. Would you say there's been a change in quality or even consistency for Sam? Have you noticed a change in him?
No, I don't think so. I mean, when Jaira left, he was a little bit sad about that at first. I think he had a really special bond with Jaira in the classroom, and he still asks about her. I saw her in one day last week, and he was like sitting on her lap, and he was so happy to have her back there again. So they do form bonds, but then when Miss Evelyn came into the room, like he just immediately kind of bonded with her as well. So I think the personalities of the people who come in to work at Hilltop are just warm and bubbly, and the kids are drawn to them. So the change doesn't affect them too much. I mean, like any child, you'd expect them to be a little bit sad when someone who they love, frankly, leaves the classroom. I think his experience has been fine with it. As a parent, I don't feel like we got a ton of notice about the changes in the room. Like I heard from Michelle today that she's going to be in the classroom next week, which I'm thrilled about, but I don't think any communication has gone out before this. So I think for the parents, just having a little notice would be more helpful. Then we can have those conversations at home with the kid, like, oh, you're going to see a new teacher in your classroom this week. Isn't that exciting? I always find with my older son, when he was small, we talk about things in advance, like a babysitter's coming, or we're going to be at a friend's house, and it just warmed him up to the idea of change. So that would be the one suggestion I'd make, but it's been good.
Yeah, thank you for that. Somewhere. Okay, there we go. It was off. I will say, and I love all the classrooms equally, but I do find myself spending the most time probably in garden room. I just feel like that, random bunch of kiddos. I go to River too, Django. Garden, they're just so much fun in garden. I don't know something about them. They all seem like, characters in this sitcom I watch. They're all so hilarious. They're all so unique. It's funny because I'm usually pretty good at remembering kids' names. But when I get to garden, I just call them all gardeners because to me they have the personality of garden, right? And I really appreciate the culture that Alex and Nalco have fostered in there. I feel welcome all the time when I come in there. I heard you say that there was a difference, right, between how classrooms at Hilltop were before COVID and after. What certain things would you like to see come back that maybe was a little bit more prevalent before COVID? You mentioned, spending time in the classroom was a little bit more feasible. Any other kind of things or traditions that you wish we still did?
Yeah, I think the biggest change that I notice now is just kind of the socializing outside of the school isn't as prevalent as it was before. I think, there were more activities. When David was at Hilltop, we would do potlucks and such in the school, which even then it was really crowded. It was a tight space to fit all those families in there, but it'd probably be harder now still. But there were a little bit more organization of family get-togethers before, which I totally understand why that stopped during COVID. I don't fault Hilltop at all, but maybe we can start to bring more of that back. Our experience with other parents in this classroom is a little bit different. There is a little bit less socialization outside of the classroom. I don't know, but I would guess, at least my personal experience, is that Sam is my second child. I've got a lot of activities outside of the school for David because he's got other sports he plays and friend activities, so Sam, unfortunately, is just kind of an afterthought. So I love him so much. We do just kind of drag him around him. So it is, you do have to make more of an effort to prioritize him and his immediate friends, which, shame on us. We should be so, yeah, I think just more socialization is kind of the thing that's missing most.
That's good to know. Somebody mentioned that about Sam, because Sam to me is so like resilient and just like malleable. He always just goes with the flow. He's never somebody who's like, you know, putting up a fuss about anything, so I can see how it's easy to just kind of drag him along somewhere. Thank you so much, Darcy. We're going to move on to Hoda now. Thank you for joining us, Hoda. As a newer parent, can you share your transition to Hilltop and how that has been for you in your couple of months since you joined us?
Yeah, so I've been on the wait list forever. I started complaining about that. So we got on the wait list before Soren was born, and then COVID happened and all those things. So and back then Hilltop would only admit 2 years and older, but COVID changed that, so he got like deprioritized a little bit. So we wanted to send him to school when he's 2, and he didn't get a spot in Hilltop, so we sent him somewhere else. And then luckily he got a spot this year, so he's in Hilltop, which was my #1 choice after all the research I did. So yeah, that's how we decided. Do you want to know why?
Yeah, why
So, I mean, it's interesting. It was for me mostly about this whole creativity, social justice, being aware, being compassionate, and all those things. I read about Hilltops, and I had friends, they had kids here. So it started with that, to be honest, but then at some point I felt these issues are way more complicated than even I acknowledged, and I knew they're this complicated. Like even we look at the last stream of layoffs in tech industry, they all talked about diversity, inclusion, but we look at people that they were let go, they are the diverse set of people. They got rid of ethics program, they got rid of diversity, inclusion programs, and I'm like, this board is so complicated, and I don't even know all these answers. I need to be somewhere where I can be more vulnerable even as a parent, that he's gonna come home with questions, and it's not as easy that diversity is good, yay. No, because he's gonna go walk in the world and see that's not true. Like these companies are not looking at it that way, and I don't wanna kind of like, you know, I don't know, I'm obviously should be child appropriate, but I want him to know the reality too, and that's great because I can have a conversation with Michelle, Jill, and Rom about these things and how we teach kids and how should I answer these questions, and that's what makes Hilltop really unique for me. Me and my husband, we're both, we have a science background, super competitive and everything, and I didn't want Soren to have that experience. I was like, I told Michelle this, I can teach him math, science, whatever, I want him to learn to be a good human being and compassionate person, and that's why I chose him.
Thank you. I really appreciate you mentioning that and you sharing that with the teaching team, because I think part of our philosophy, or part of our values is that learning in relationship. So to know that you got all the other stuff covered and we can support Soren with the social emotional stuff. It's really good to know. One, I think it alleviates a little bit of pressure, and then uniquely to your classroom, well not necessarily actually, but one of the things that I really appreciate about Mountain Room is that the learning is happening, and the children don't necessarily realize it until maybe they go home and they share something. And one of their things that they do really well is kind of sharing the learning, which I think with emergent curriculum sometimes it's kind of hard to notice. Yet it happens so consistently in Mountain. So when children do get to kindergarten, they're ready, and it's like I didn't even know they were ready, but you can tell. And then one of the things I wanted to ask you, how would you like, maybe if you even would want, but how would you want your identity and your culture, your family values shared in the classroom, and what are some ways that you think the classroom could support, just getting to know who Soren is and his family is, and just bringing that to the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for example, maybe we can come in for our New Year. I know there was, Holi was celebrated in the class, so I emailed about coming and maybe explaining something about our New Year, which is spring equinox, first day of the spring. And those are the things I think will be valuable. We celebrate summer solstice, winter solstice, so those things I think are good, but honestly, I think just seeing him being accepted as someone who probably, like, English is not his first language. I mean, he's getting so much better now, and like he communicates, he's not shy anymore, but to me, like, it's about day to day, what's happening, and he feels accepted, he feels loved, not just like, okay, I could show up 2 days and explain all our culture. I think I value those, but not as much as seeing him thriving and feeling included.
Right.
And he really has that. Like, Michelle came to our home. I mean, I couldn't even believe it. Like, when she offered that I'm gonna have a house visit, and just seeing Soren just immediately going sitting next to her made me so happy.
Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad that's one of the things, again, unique to Mountain is those home visits are starting to happen again. And it sounds like they're, profound. Another thing I wanted to ask you is, if you were to consider, hypothetically, a different program for whatever reason, what do you think you would look for in another program that maybe you don't see in Hilltop right now?
Honestly, I can't think of anything. Like, location, yeah, maybe not ideal, but I mean, I don't care. Like, that's like not even top 5 on my list. Like, you guys move, I don't know, to Federal Way, probably I'm gonna. So yeah, he's a super sensitive kid, so just seeing he wants to go to school is like a big plus for me. So I'm like, don't want to miss out on that.
What would you say are some of the biggest changes you've seen in him that you really value?
So he doesn't talk much about the school at home, and it seems a normal behavior amongst his peers. But I think he's more confident, more creative. Like, he probably always had these random weird ideas, but he was not really encouraged to talk about them. But now he comes and like talks about them, and he's really confident, and I really like that about him. He's very confident in his skin. Like, if he has an idea, if he thinks something is the way it's supposed to be, he speaks up, and I really like that.
Thank you. And then lastly, what do you think Hilltop should do more of, and maybe what do you think they should do less of?
So in terms of, I really love the fact that they got some opportunity to get educated about the unhoused community in Seattle. I think we parents need some more education on those things too. I feel like, these are tough questions. I mean, there is this, I think the whole society is very divided. Either people are like, this is the best way, this is the right way, or this is the wrong way. Nobody's talking about all these other solutions and things that are hard, nobody wants to think about, but we need to think about them. So just the fact that he brought those questions home was an opportunity for me to think about them. And I'm really learning from him. And that's amazing. We were talking about the unhoused community. He wanted to go to Seymour, so I drove him to different neighborhoods, and we walked by people, and I saw compassion in him, not like, oh, this is weird or strange. And that resilience is something I really appreciate in kids. But then he had questions I had no answer about, and I'm like, maybe even if I had prepared and read, 20 books and listened to 50 podcasts, some questions I had no idea about. So I was trying to be easy on myself, but then I think it's a good opportunity for us parents maybe to, get together about some topics that are important and they'll be covered during the month, to get more educated about them. And even bringing, maybe in a more, the society I think is so divided that I even don't dare to talk about things, on social media sometimes. I think but if we really can have this cohort of people, that there's good faith among us. We know we are coming from good place. We want our kids to be educated, to be good citizens, but we have different points of view. Instead of people that they just decide not coming to Hilltop. Sure. If we had an avenue to just get those points of view and see maybe there's something about them relevant, hard for me. I usually dismiss them myself the first person. I'm coming from that place that's why I think something's missing. Because I'm also worried that my kid is gonna be, this little lefty dude that it's like the way he cannot hang out with people, or he makes a friend and that friend's, dad is supporter of such and such, and then I cannot hang out with them. So I'm trying to be a little bit more flexibility. So I'm getting worried sometimes that we get maybe into our own bubble too much.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think obviously just to be considerate of other perspectives and just to be able to hear, everybody's kind of take on things is helpful. One of the things that I've been trying to teach children, which is, it's pretty conceptual. I was talking to the school age children over in our altar room classroom the other day, and they were telling me about these cool things that they saw on TikTok. And I was like, okay, but like, do you know where they got that information on TikTok? And he was like, what do you mean? It's TikTok. I was like, yeah, you just can't believe everything you have to like find the source, right? We're trying to like, I was trying to teach them to be like, to find that source so you don't just believe that, you could turn gold into slime or all these weird things that they tell me all the time. So I think that's helpful to know, right? Just be able to take all those different perspectives and say yes, and let me find out, as opposed to be like, well, I'm going to just believe it, because it could be dangerous, right? We see now with all the misinformation, how dangerous it is in our country and in our world. So I think that's one of the pieces that I think maybe should be more intentional as, an early learning institution, to just be like, question everything. That's one thing I've learned when I went to school, which is funny because now I feel like education is being, divisive, or it's being, demonized. It's this thing now of like, how did education become now a detriment, right? And that's one thing that we have to teach our children, to be like, no, this is still, one of the most powerful tools that we have. Thank you so much, Oda. So now, Sarah, thank you for joining us, Sarah. I think similar to Darcy, you have a couple of different perspectives. I think you were on the board at some point.
My husband Frank was on the board.
Frank, so
and
you have different perspectives.
Yeah, and I shared a role with Darcy on the finance committee as well.
Awesome. So can you maybe share some things that you've noticed has changed since, especially since Merrill was here, and now I know that Holmes is going to be changing schools really soon, but maybe some things that you have just noticed since Merrill came here, since your Frank's time on the board, and now with Holmes.
Yeah, I think when we first learned about Hilltop, this may show how ignorant we are. We didn't really know much about social emotional intelligence in the sense of how it's taught at an early age. And so when we learned about Hilltop, we're like, what is this? We gotta get in. I don't know how. And it's been a real great practice for all of us, frankly, and having the conversations with teachers about what happened during the day. And like Darcy had mentioned, I remember hanging out in the classroom a lot at pickup with Merrill and learning about what they talked about and what they did. But frankly, it helped me practice those conversations at work and in other environments. And so I thank Hilltop for introducing me to kind of practicing new norms of behavior, and to say that these conversations, what's appropriate for age, I find that the more practice, the better we are at just being comfortable with conflicting conversations. And I don't see it as particular subjects, but just having the practice of talking. And I thank Hilltop for that wholeheartedly. Just recently, Meryl, we had a babysitter, and she looked at the babysitter and asked what their pronouns are. And it's these moments that I know that these conversations are coming to light, and it's really important. And so I thank Hilltop. But as far as differences, I think Darcy explained a lot of them in that, there's a lot different kind of communal attention, just because we've gone from being pre-pandemic, lots of things together, oh my gosh, we can't see each other, to kind of finding what this new opportunity is. I miss field trips. So the more field trips, the better in my mind. I remember when one of the field trips, they were practicing walking at a certain distance, and I realized that we took Meryl in a stroller everywhere. So she had no stamina to walk. And it's these little moments that kind of like awaken. It's like, they can do that. And they went on a bus, and they had these field trips. And recently, Holmes, they went to PCC, and it's just wonderful that they have these experiences and knowing how loud the Fremont Bridge is and being able to walk through the noise. So I appreciate all those moments, and just more opportunities to socialize and get to know both the faculty and the teachers and other parents. With Holmes as well, we are definitely in the case where we're realizing we need to put more effort into Holmes's friends and Holmes's friends' parents. And so it's a practice for us as well. But every time we've stepped into Hilltop further, whether it's having a conversation with the teacher or joining the board or the finance committee, it's enriched our lives so much more because we've had the opportunity to see the organization in a wider light. And I would say that some of the harder conversations haven't necessarily been with teachers, but with other parents because they haven't had that wide view. And I'm so thankful that we've been able to join these conversations and understand both the hardships and the opportunities to be able to have that perspective.
Thank you. As a parent, how would you like these conversations to be facilitated, right? That's one thing that I think we all as adults struggle is how do we talk to other adults when it comes to some maybe conflicting ideas. So how would you, one, like to be approached with these conversations, and how would you feel it would be easiest for you to be able to just have these conversations with other parents?
It's hard because once you think about either a subject or the type of conversation you want, all of a sudden something else is more important. And so it's more, to me, creating an environment of being able to have the conversations, reminding parents that they can come into the classroom and they can stay for a moment if that's okay, or kind of hang out by the fence and talk if there's availability, for a teacher to spend some time. I know that sometimes with ratios you're strapped, but just talking to parents more, because I don't think that we all understand what we can do. And so once we see it, then it becomes more available. And those conversations are more readily accessed in that sense, over picking and choosing what to talk about.
Would you feel it would be helpful for Hilltop to just be able to facilitate a space and a time to have these conversations with maybe a moderator with a particular area of expertise? And then how likely are you to join those conversations?
Yeah, we've joined several of the town halls that Hilltop has hosted, and it's always a challenge of picking a time that works for everyone. But I think that those have been helpful just to know that Hilltop is talking about something in particular, know that Hilltop sees a need to have a conversation, which is either because of the present moment or because the audience, either parents or faculty, it's helpful for all of us to see that that is a required conversation for us to acknowledge. And so just even knowing that the conversation is happening, I think is important. Whether or not people show up is the hardship, but knowing that Hilltop's thinking about it, I think is really important. And it, I'm sure it changes. I mean, there were the conversations with the nurse during the pandemic versus certain topics that, we deem important for our society of the day.
Thank you. Kind of switching our lens a little bit, what are maybe some facilities things or some actual physical space-wise that you would love Hilltop to maybe develop or create that maybe you feel is lacking or missing now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm always impressed at what you do with what you have, to be honest. And it's the curiosity and the conversation through that curiosity that I'm more impressed with than what you actually have. It's something that Frank and I, at our student-teacher or parent-teacher conversations, we're always trying to ask, what can we do to help you? Is there anything that you need? And we've had teachers ask for particular things at the moment. Chopsticks were asked for because that was something that was asked for. Toilet paper rolls. I mean, it's not necessarily anything that's of any high monetary value, but it's always fun because then you get to hear a little bit more from the teacher of what they're looking to try with students. And so I think it's more of a conversation into the curriculum of the teacher, and it's not curriculum so formal, but what you're trying to help the kids work through, whether it's a textural or with their fingers or a conversation. I think that that's more important than some sort of overarching Hilltop administrative ask.
Thank you for sharing that. Another question I wanted to ask you specifically was, I know that Merrill goes to a school outside of Seattle Public Schools, and that I think Holmes is going to also be attending one. One, what made you choose one of those schools? And then what ways do you think Hilltop can partner with them so one of the things that I feel it varies in parents' experience is if their kid isn't in an SPS school, they get kind of, relegated a little bit, and it's like, well, we follow SPS's calendar. So what are some things that you would like for Hilltop to be able to connect with, the Birchies and the, Seattle Days and all those different schools that maybe we're not necessarily partnered with yet?
Yeah, so we chose for Merrill to go to Birchie. It's on Capitol Hill, and Holmes will start in their pre-K program next year, which they offer for the year prior to kindergarten. And frankly, private school or independent school wasn't part of our thought process until the pandemic. And we have a very young, for her cohort, daughter, so her birthday's at the end of August, and I remember having lots of conversations with Michelle about this as well. And now just learning, how does a really young person of her cohort manage through the school system? And in the pandemic, if you had a chance to hold your kid back because starting kindergarten in the pandemic, what is that? A lot of parents held their kids back. And so in Merrill's cohort, she's easily got at least 2 years spread in her same class. And I was really worried about kind of the peer and social emotional experience that she would have. It was clear in talking with her teachers that academically she was ready to start that learning process, but just thinking through as they got older, how Mary would be able to show up and face some of those peer dynamics was what made me a little nervous. And it made us look into more independent school options, knowing that SPS throughout the pandemic, if you think about it from a systematic perspective, and you have faculty who've been around for a while at a school, you've got nurses and nutritionists and the administrative staff and those who support the lunchtime and so forth. Those are a system that fell apart during the pandemic. And asking for that experience and that teamwork to all of a sudden appear again after 2 years or so when schools opened up is a lot to ask. And so for us, having a youngster, it was important to us that we joined a school that we knew had a little bit more unity in that sense. And that was why we chose to go to Birchie. I don't think that the same decisions, we would even have that today, because I think SPS has come together a lot more, but they've needed time. And it was a time and place decision for our family that we made that decision.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, because I do remember, when we were open and schools were closed, that divide, right? It was always an announcement of the district to we're coming back, and then, the teachers union said, no, we're not yet. And then, like, how, one, they were divided, but also how families and communities had to kind of choose, right? So I appreciate you siding with, staff and, the people who affect children on a more intimate level. Our school agers, and maybe even some of our preschoolers, maybe when CJ was at Fremont, they did take the time to go and, protest with the teachers at BF Day, and, they were there in solidarity just to be able to show support that, like, hey, we're here for the teachers who are more at risk for whatever, just because, of all the factors of, COVID and just being with the many different children. So I appreciate you saying that. And then another thing, too, that I wanted to mention is right now, Hilltop, we're trying to kind of quantify this kindergarten readiness, right? And it's like, how do we do it with, maybe a little bit more conceptual curriculum like Reggio or Emergent curriculum? So how would you feel, what would you have liked to have had maybe for Merrill or Holmes to be able to take to a different school and say, here's what Hilltop has to say as far as some sort of formal assessment? What are some of those things that you wish maybe Hilltop gave you before?
Sure. Before I get to that, what I didn't answer was partnership with schools and Hilltop. And I think that as a parent, discovering what the Seattle school system is was like a second job when Merle was going into kindergarten. Frank and I both went to public school, but I didn't know much about private schools. We both didn't know about independent schools and all the offerings, and then you go into public schools, there's the lottery schools and the zone schools, and it was a lot of information to take in. And I think from a preparatory standpoint, just helping parents understand and navigate what those options are would be really helpful, because it took a lot of my effort to talk with others and learn about schools and how the Seattle school system works. As far as kindergarten prep, I will chalk it up to the social emotional experience that Hilltop offers. I think that I don't know how to reinforce how important that is in terms of helping kids literally walk into a room. And they walk in confidently, they walk in with a curiosity, they walk in knowing that, you know, there may be challenges, but somehow they will navigate through that. And I personally don't know how to reinforce the importance of that, and which Hilltop really kind of helps our children become better citizens in that way. I mean, our children started Hilltop nonverbal. They couldn't go to the bathroom by themselves. And, you know, these are all components that we've been so thankful that we've learned how to help and coach our kids through these moments. But the social emotional experience is what helped us do it well. And over knowing a particular math equation or how to read, I think that that's been the most important part of setting our kids up for success. And I do remember that there were conversations on what our kids needed to know, and I also didn't understand the importance of what kindergarten or first grade would offer to our kids. And so I remember talking, does she need to read? No, kindergarten will help her learn how to put you know, phonics and phonetics together to learn how to read. You don't need to know that yet, and that's that teacher's job. And I don't think that I really understood the importance of these developmental age placements in a curriculum sense like that. But all the way through, social emotional is what will carry you through any certain experience in that sense. And I can tell with our kids. We've had a kid, we referred a kid mid-year this past year into preschool at Fremont, and their parents are just overjoyed at how their kid is just so happy and is able to not only be excited about school, but confident, comes home and actually talks about their experience. We had a friend who stepped out of Hilltop during the pandemic for a period of time, but once they stepped back in, their parents just realized what was missing in their kid's life. And so it's these moments that you realize, oh, there's something going on at Hilltop that's really, really helpful. We just went to a wedding this past weekend with my family. My family's really big and they keep having more kids. Not to judge, but my kids walked into the room confidently. And there's a lot of people we haven't seen in a while, and a lot of cousins that they didn't know that they had. And they were confident to step in and sit on the floor and play with who my daughter was so excited. She met a new friend. It was her cousin. But, you know, she did that on her own. And so I want to reinforce how the social emotional Reggio Emilia experience is, because over curriculum and what maybe the norm of what we think of curriculum, social emotional experience, it carries through everything.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's something that I do notice a lot at Hilltop. I used to work at different organizations and different schools, and a lot of the times when I would notice conflict between children, the adults were always quick to resolve their conflict for them, whereas now at Hilltop, I hear a child say, you know, so-and-so did this to me, and I'll hear a teacher say, did you tell the child? And then they immediately go to the child and then they solve their own issue, and it's like, after a while, they realize, oh, I don't even tell the teacher, they'll tell directly the student, and, you know, I think that's profound, and it's, you know, so wonderful to see them just being able to be confident in themselves, to be able to solve those problems, and, you know, have that skill, social and emotionally, to be able to, you know, be their own advocate, which I think is so important. Thank you to you guys for answering our specific questions. I did want to open up a portion of our day to have some of our staff members ask questions. Would you guys be okay with that? And would you guys be up for asking this wonderful panel some questions that you may have about anything? Yeah? Share this. All right. Does anyone have a question they want to ask the panel? Don't be shy. Darlene?
Oh, I had a question. I said no, but, you know, I lied. So
So this year, we started offering parent education classes as a part of our institute work. And we've had 2 so far, and very little turnout from Hilltop parents. What would you suggest or what would you recommend that we do to help families start to participate in something that some of you talked about, like those opportunities to learn? What can we do to help entice that for you all? No pressure.
One thing I remember from before the pandemic is that a lot of those conversations were immediately after pickup, and there was childcare. And so it was really easy, because I was already at the school, to join in a conversation for an extra hour, because my kid was taken care of, and that just made it easy to join, over trying to finagle joining a Zoom during dinner, or one of us toggling bedtime to afford joining the conversation.
I just wanted to say maybe it's gonna take time, I think, for all of us. Like, I was super social person, always planning parties. Now I see 2 people in the room, I freak out. So it's like, I think some of it on us, we are like slowly running back to the society. So just don't cancel them because of bad turnout yet. Give us more chance.
I'll just add that I don't think I was aware of the 2 that happened unless I heard about it from Darlene in like one of our other conversations that we would have. So if you're just informing parents via email, I don't read all the emails that come out, I'm sorry, I'm busy. Honestly, like, just put a sign up on the front door when we walk in to say, hey, there's this awesome thing happening, because I see the door when I walk in every day, and I think I might pay more attention. But as Sarah said too, if it could be immediately after pickup, that would be a huge bonus as well. But just simpler advertising maybe would be good.
Yeah, I think maybe this could be an opportunity to utilize the social shares, because I think there's, depending on the classroom and depending on like the social share, I think that there is like a community that's built like separate, right? Like just parent conversations. And I think like anything, if you're invited by your peer, which would be a parent in this circumstance, then you have a higher chance of attending. And also, I mean, I think for our families, we're really kind of like you said, like we're sort of starved for this community, right? And so we're developing our own community of parents and of families in Seattle still, and I think that could be an opportunity to just learn about someone's family in a different way. Like, oh, do we align their values, or is that like this like one-time thing, like hang out? So I think that could be an opportunity.
The only other thing I'll add is, I think it's an opportunity at the beginning of the year to bring everyone together and talk about the incredible initiatives and efforts and programs you have beyond their classroom. I don't think every parent knows that, and I don't think every parent checks their email, but if there was kind of a school-wide get-together, and you say, welcome to the school year, here are all the wonderful things that we do, here's the parent series, here's ways that you can get involved and volunteer, here's, our fundraising expectations, like just clarify expectations and provide opportunities for them to get involved in person at the outset of the school year. I think that would go a long way.
I want to add something.
I'm so sorry.
I did attend one of those as someone who signed up, and it was, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, but it was about the diversity and moving the schools from segregation to, so I don't remember the title. And it was really thought-provoking, because as we were hearing the story of Ruby and how she went to school and everything, this moment that I was like, if I was her mom, would I do it? Would I put my kid through that? It's so heroic to hear it as something that happened in the nation, but as a parent, would I put my kid through that danger? And that was something, if it wasn't a Zoom meeting, if it was in person, probably I would be more comfortable sharing and being one. But there's this thing about Zoom that you feel if it's not recorded, it's being recorded, so you're like a little bit more self-conscious about how much you can share. So that was a feedback. Maybe if it's more in person, it would be better.
Thank you. Any other questions? Darlene, can you answer that?
Okay. I'm wondering how you feel about receiving documentation and learning stories. I know some of you have received them as like paper documents or email. How do you like to receive your child's learning? Or I'm just curious to hear your reactions of experiences receiving learning stories, if that's.
We love learning stories. It's great to receive them in the morning, of the moment, digitally, but the binders are so cool. We've kept Meryl's binder, and it will be part of her memory bin forever, because I thought that was such a unique offering from Hilltop to notice in the moment her learning journeys and how they shifted and changed throughout the year, and the teachers took the time to write down what happened and took a picture. It was really wonderful. So I love them.
Yeah, same here. I love the binder. So the first month, I think Soren did something was about what don't you like, what's your problem book. It was about his problems, so it was wind. He hated the fact that it messes up his hair and there's something about his hair. And then the month after I was like, what's your problem this month? And he's like, obviously Cheyenne, which is his little brother. This is a bigger problem. So just even seeing how the problems are becoming, I would say, more abstract, really, I think he's developing to me more. That was really interesting to see. So I love the binders, and I'm one of those parents that actually like the emails. I save them, put them in an archive, and review them more than once. So yeah, communication is great, and especially like if we can get to know like in advance what you guys did with the giving them education about our unhoused community. Like we knew in advance that this is happening in the next couple of weeks, and you expect questions, and they're not coming out of nowhere, and that was something I really appreciated.
Yeah, I liked the paper binders that we had before with David. It was nice to just get it and like each time you bring it home, kind of flip through the pages and you could remember like, oh yeah, a couple of months ago he was doing this and now he's doing this, and you see the progression. The digital ones now, you don't get that connection so much. I mean, they're not individualized to the child, they're more classroom specific. So I miss having the individualized ones, and having something tangible to hold is a better experience, I think, than clicking through. Also, just managing like all the different platforms that we're using with Hilltop is frustrating, but we're adapting, we'll figure it out. Yeah, the 3 different apps that I need on my phone to just get him in and hear about what he's doing are, it'd be nice if there was one, but I know there's not one that does everything.
Billy, before you answer, I'm glad that you said that, Darcy, because one of the things that we have been talking a lot about is the investment in what we think is parent-friendly resources, Edrica being one of them, because, we hear a lot about being on the go, and so being able to have an app to go, like when you're at home, to look at, and so we have gone in the direction of going away from paper to more electronic, but what I'm hearing from you all is that paper tangible feels,
I'm a librarian, by the way.
feels like what we should be going back towards, and those are the things that we're trying to seek out. Like, let's not put our efforts into something.
Yeah,
if the want is really.
I think so. I would prefer the paper-based. I mean, sometimes I'll log into Educa, not via the link that like Alex or Nalco will email to me, but I'll just log into it. But then I don't know where to navigate to find the stories. I think Educa can do so much and we just use it for one thing. And so like I don't know how to navigate it unless I've got a direct link to the learning story. And so like, I don't know, if we're not gonna use it to its full potential, I think it's just kind of confusing. And I'd almost rather go back to the simple paper binders.
Great. Billy and Michelle, if you wanted to add to that, I just wanted to go ahead.
I like having both. I like getting the email with like an immediate sort of report, or because I think that allows for more like quick conversation with our kids. And then I really like having the little journals. I think that's like a really, like Sarah, you were saying, it's like a really nice keepsake. I think that that's really great. So, I mean, you're probably right. It's like digital anyway, and then you just print it out. Well, I don't know. That's nice.
Well, it seems like there's 2 pieces. There's like the part that we love physically, which is about our kid and their development and the art that they make and the friends they make and all that. And that's a lot of work. So I'd be curious to kind of throw it back at the teachers and say, like, what's feasible in that space? But anything that comes our way in that space is like so heartfelt and appreciated. So maybe with more exploration of like how to balance that. I like the weekly emails because the way that Jill and Jacob have kind of concocted them is here are things that are popping up in the classroom, themes, interests, challenges. And then they'll literally put a dialogue with direct quotes of the children, so they make it so real. And then they talk about how they use those opportunities to teach the kids and how the Emergent curriculum works. And so in my mind, I've learned a ton just how everything kind of happens in the classroom and how the Emergent curriculum works. And so that's kind of a separate value add.
I have lots of questions. So I work in the infant classroom, and we have been one of those few brave souls who has started to bring families together in person this year. So we actually have monthly family gatherings where our families hang out, and we've had wonderful turnout. And we have this great excitement and responsibility of being like everybody's first teacher at Hilltop, really wanting folks to be connected to Hilltop and especially to each other as a parent community. Even though we've had lots of opportunity for people to get together, like, I feel like I'm being a creepy matchmaker now. And trying to like force something, and they're pleasant and lovely, but I don't see people like connecting in that way that I hope they will, that, you know, I hope they'll build friendships and relationships and support each other. So to those of you maybe who were here pre-pandemic and have those types of like community cultivated through Hilltop, or even after pandemic, if folks have found like friendship and community in other families, like how did that work for you? Like, what was the moment? What was the motivation? If you can share like anything about trying to make us less creepy, that's great.
Swipe left.
I will say last year CJ's room, the social chair started like a text chain, and so it's hard because it's not the teacher's role to facilitate social activities outside the classroom. You have so much going on. And then the social chair, I think, gets overwhelmed and is trying to be inclusive, and it's hard to find, especially in the winter, places to meet up that, you know, accommodate that size and, you know, don't get everybody super wet. And so the text chain is a nice way of kind of democratizing it, like sign up for this, and you're going to an event or a park or whatever. It could be last minute, hey, we're headed to the farmer's market, or hey, we're doing this. It really worked quite well. You just need a couple people to start the process.
I have a thought, but now I can't remember what I was going to say, so.
Yeah, I wish our current classes started like a text thread early in the year, because I think it would have been helpful, especially like you say, those last minute gatherings are sometimes the best attended, because trying to plan something weeks out and you're like, okay, maybe I'm free, but maybe I want to reserve this weekend to do something else. But if someone asks you like, hey, you're down to hang out tomorrow morning, chances are you'll get a lot of people. So I think texting is really the way to go. I don't know what made it click the first time around when David was there. I mean, like, you know, Meryl and David were in the classroom together, and it probably took the better part of a year before we really started to feel connected to some of the parents. It's just repeat exposure, and eventually it'll happen. I mean, I think most of the connections came like from birthday parties. It would happen, frankly, like at someone's house. I can remember going to your house, Sarah, for Meryl's birthday party, and when you step into someone else's life and you learn about them, like seeing that article framed in your kitchen of Frank's chili dog recipe, and talk about it. Oh yeah, I know Sarah and Frank. I like to make chili dog. You connect in that way, but if you're just like talking about if you're just hanging out and talking about your kids, like, oh, you know, so-and-so said this the other day, like the conversation is centered around the kids, you gotta start having conversations about the parents I think, before it really, melts together. I don't know how to do that. It just happens sometimes.
We need to frame everybody's recipes.
Make people do those really awkward icebreakers where you have to tell something scary about yourself. I don't know. Those work.
Yeah, I just kind of echoing Darcy, what you're saying. I think it's organic. I honestly think it's organic, and we're good workies for us. Last year, we have some family connections with, and friendships have grown from those families from Oliver's classroom last year, and they're starting to grow this year. I think it just is organic and takes time. That's just my 2 cents.
To echo all of that, birthday parties are great, and they don't have to be a lot. They can just be hanging out at the park. But also, to your point of matchmaking, I love hearing who my kids are playing with in that moment, because when we think about scheduling a play date, I never know who to schedule it with. But if I already know that my kid is having a grand old time with so-and-so, it's already preconceived in my mind to invite that family to join. And so that's always helpful to know.
And it feels less daunting.
Yes, it feels less daunting. Like, I know we're gonna get a lot. Like, it's gonna be okay.
So I'm fairly new to Hilltop, or quite new to Hilltop, and Billy, we're so grateful to have Billy as a social chair in our classroom in Raindrop. And I wanted to know a little bit more about, as a social chair, you, Billy, or others that may either have had the role or consider the role, how would you like to be involved with the children's classes? Because getting a better sense of, I know from class to class it may differ, but, we want to partner with parents that are motivated and in a way that's valuable, and not miss opportunities to have your help with the learning and the fun for our kids.
I'll just start with echo what Ho was saying about celebrating something that's unique to your family, or it may be unique to other people as well, but just recognizing a moment, whether it's the Spring Maker Rocks or a holiday that your family really treasures. I have a hard time coming up with crafts, or even coming up with an activity for kids to do, but if it's centered on something that we already celebrate, that's an easy one to kind of have an idea and something that already feels like it's unique and something that we can share. And so I love the idea of asking families if there is anything that they want to celebrate and share with the classroom, because it just seems like a natural invitation for them to come in and be a part of the class.
One thing I thought may be helpful, that if because Hilltop goes and has the kind of like the calendar year, the school year, which wasn't the case in my son's previous school. So if we have a meeting, at the beginning of the year for parents to get together, I think it's good to get also what they are interested in and how they are willing to contribute, and then have those one-on-one kind of like reaching out to them. It's not like sending an email saying, okay, who wants to do something this month? It's not like, oh, okay, we are thinking such and such. For example, I'm really interested in nutrition. I'm a nutrition course, so it's like, okay, I can have kids-friendly recipes that we can bring and entertain the kids. So if I reach out, let's say in August, can you do this? I'll be more than happy. But if it's just something aligned with your culture, something that is, as you said, low lift, you're not going out of your way to learning something that you don't know. That's going to be really great for social cultures to have that list of what parents do and what they're interested in.
I seem to remember when we signed up each of our kids, we filled out the family questionnaire of these are some things we do at home or traditions that we celebrate. So I think you guys have that data somewhere. I trust that you do. Frankly, for us, if you just reach out pointedly and say, hey, we know that your family celebrates Hanukkah. You want to come in and talk about Hanukkah with us? I think we would be much more likely to respond and say yes. But if you just leave it open and it'd be like, who wants to come in and share something? It's too much to think about. How do I narrow it down? But if you just asked me to do, hey, can you come and do this one thing? I think that makes it easier for parents, and you don't have to think so hard about it. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love the, when you were talking about coming in and talking about the new year, and then there have been other, in both of the classrooms, different families talking about traditions or holidays that they celebrate. When I was filling that out, I'm like, well, we just kind of do like all of it, but like anything specific, like is it good enough? It is good enough, right? And I think parents just need that extra, like, even if it's just coming in for like 10 minutes and doing yoga. I'm not a yoga expert, I've been doing it for a really long time, and they're kids, they're not like experts either. It's fine, so I think if there's specific things that the teachers are probably gonna stand in the back and snicker, but I can't. That next Billy
Right, yeah. I actually was doing that with Oliver this morning, and I'm very pregnant, and teaching him how to do eagle pose was really interesting. He didn't care, like it's fine. And so I think if there are specific things that you're like, oh, this, I've seen an interest, or following the Emergent curriculum sort of philosophy, or if there's just something you think would be cool, I think as a social chair, I would be willing to reach out to the parent community and say, here's a calendar, here are some topics that, or whatever works for you, but this is one idea. These are some topics that the teachers want to cover. Does anyone have very limited knowledge about this? Or I guess, like a little bit, like you said, but like, you don't have to be an expert, but does anyone have an extra 10 minutes that they would want to sign up for this slot? I would be happy to put together a super simple calendar.
Just 4 quick ideas. The first is field trips. Parents would love to volunteer. The second is volunteering for volunteering efforts like the food drive. It's been really fun to kind of do what I can to help support that. The third would be if there's a desire to do any sort of birthday celebrations for the kids, the parents could come and see that at other schools, or just reading time. Happy to come and read a book.
So we have time for maybe 2 more questions, and I'm going to ask them both. Time's up. One of the things I've been thinking a lot as the group has been talking is about this experience of Hilltop and the reason why you came here. And also at the same time, I'm going on my 4th year, Darcy? Yeah, I think so. Darcy and I have been through a lot together. I think about how to keep that tradition of Hilltop, but also realizing that we have to adapt. And one of the things that we're struggling, at least I struggle with on a regular basis, is we have people who come study from us all the time, across the country, across the world, who want to come see what we're doing at Hilltop. At the same time, when we try to become a more diverse community, opening up SPP, doing those other things, that comes with having to shift our narrative a little bit, right? And when the number one thing that we hear from people is, it's great that you can do this here, but there's no way we can do it where we're at, because we have these limitations, whether it's a curriculum, or whether it's budget, or whether it's the community that they serve, or whatever the reason is. So my question to this group is, how do we keep our tradition in the things that we do, but still evolve, and bring the parents along with us?
I think, of course, like, rules and regulations that an institution has to follow are pretty powerful, but parents are pretty powerful too. A parent community and advocacy from parents, that's pretty powerful too. So I don't know the answer, but I will just put that out there. Yeah, this one's a challenge.
We didn't do a ton of research before we joined Hilltop, other than I had heard from someone that it was the best preschool of its type. And for me, it was like, oh, okay, that sounds good. I should get into it, but I didn't really know what the curriculum was about until I was here. But it all worked out great because I love it. I think parents maybe kind of have always liked the prestige of Hilltop and knowing that they're at one of the best preschools in the city, the country, what have you. And so when things start to change, they start to worry, like, is it still prestigious? And I think it very much is, but parents maybe don't know that. I seem to remember in the past that different educators at Hilltop would publish like articles in journals or even some have like published books before. Sharing that with the wider community might help parents to see like Hilltop is still relevant, it is still top of its field, so even though we're making these changes, like, don't worry, it's still the quality education that you thought it was when you first joined. So like maybe that's one way to help people see, like, maybe this makes you a little uncomfortable, but the broader ECE community is really excited about what we're doing. And then maybe that kind of reinforces for the parents, like, okay, change is scary, but it's gonna be all right.
So maybe there is, parents need education too. Just because they educate the kids all the time doesn't mean they understand education as professionals. Me, one of them. So I think there's good for their kids, these changes, and maybe even understanding people that they're not necessarily going to exact same programs, really important. So I would love for my kid to, like, maybe get something, like, be exposed to things that are not like Hilltop, the brand, but something that gives him a broader experience of other people's lives. So I think there are things that they defines Hilltop for me, like social justice. Is like, if I think about Hilltop, is the creativity that my child is experiencing, social justice. So those are the elements, and then things are shifting or how we are executing around them, and I'm educated about it. That's the reason behind it. I trust you guys. So if you say this is the best way this can be done, or this is the reason we decided to do it, I think if I'm presented with some good evidence and logic, I don't mind changing.
We were so impressed with the sensory table. And then it would change, and how the curriculum in the class would change with the sensory table. But that said, I think that to Darcy's point on how Hilltop shows up in the community is really important. And Darlene, you had another question about partnering with other schools, both ECE community, but then other grade levels, which I think is really important. And it's something that in Tornado Bear Cheat they're striving for. You're creating a pipeline, frankly, whether it's to a public school or an independent school otherwise, you're creating a pipeline. And to be known for what you do and the type of kids that you're teaching and kind of molding in these wonderful ways of social, emotional, and social justice is really important, because it helps others understand what Hilltop embodies, and it helps parents understand how it kind of shows up in the community. And I think that's really important.
I think everybody expects change and evolution and improvement. What would be helpful is just understanding the things that Hilltop is uncompromising on. And so I think we've all been really clear and consistent on what those are. And so it's really hard to talk about this in abstract, frankly, versus break it down and understand what are the trade-offs, what are the evolutions you're debating, what would that force you to sacrifice, and how far are you willing to go? And so I know it's a non-answer, but you maintain so much credibility in staying true to the values of Hilltop and being uncompromising on those.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that is what we're here for this next 3 days, is a focus on our values and what are those things that we're unwilling to compromise on, and to stand up for the things that we believe in. So thank you for reassuring us on that. My last question to the group is, I heard a lot today about administration and just more communication, more structure, more information, more clarity. I'm wondering, because I think that one thing that as administrators we have committed to is prioritizing the classrooms and the children. And so almost every space in both of our buildings is dedicated to children, including transforming spaces into classrooms. And our administrative team is pretty small in comparison. We have our mentor educators who are now in classrooms, and then there's a group of us that live as nomads. We kind of find places to go and be. And I'm wondering if the perspective is that administration needs work, how do we deliver a message to show where we've shifted our priorities? And it feels like some of that is at the sacrifice of the relationship with parents, with administrators, but we put up a lot of our attention in the relationships that you have with these phenomenal people. And so it makes you wonder, like, how do you do both, right? We really committed as a team to putting salaries at a livable wage for our educators. We committed as a team to hiring benefits. We committed as a team to providing all of these resources to the folks who are working directly with children. But I think at some point it's come at a cost or a sacrifice of us as the administrators, bus driver, kitchen helper, executive director. You know, like, so there's like those, we do dual roles a lot of times. So how do we help parents see that in some way? Or do we just need to put more effort in sacrifice in other ways?
I mean, I think it comes back to bringing the community together and telling them what's going on. Because in the absence of information, the expectations can grow. And they will. Parents want a lot, they want information, they want everything. But if we don't know the context under which you're operating and the trade-offs and the budget constraints, then of course we're just going to continue to expect it based on the tuition that we pay. And so making that transparent, and maybe it comes back to that like kickoff meeting with the full community and like really expecting people to show up for that. I think that would go a long way. And then the extent to which, you know, parents feel like the communication is not being delivered at their expectations, then there's a conversation about what would be required to get a communications coordinator, whatever it is that you would need and what resources that would take. But bringing them along in that journey and understanding those things would be super helpful, because I don't right now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think just, even just like bringing back the town halls, and maybe they're there and I just have missed that. Okay, so I participated in one, and I thought it was great. It was different information. It was administrative focused, right? It was about the organization. It was kind of plans that you had as administrators leading all of these phenomenal educators. But those conversations, I think, and maybe that's just, you know, maybe you don't have capacity to do that, but that is like, that could be a suggestion. The other thing I will say though, like, it is a criticism, and I think it's something, and I appreciate you taking it seriously. However, I also appreciate that my kids know you all, right? And because you're wearing all of those different hats and you're kind of playing these different roles, our kids have an opportunity to actually, and maybe that's what it was like before. Obviously, I'm coming from like where we are now. But they know your names. They, like, Oliver, like, and Waverly, I mean, she's not really verbal yet, but like, she's, you know, clearly knows the administration. And I think that's like unique. And maybe it was like always like that, but I will say that shift to focusing on the classroom is kind of special.
I know everything that goes on, so. I have the wrong perspective, but maybe like some ideas if we do start bringing back more in-person events, whether it's parent education series or just like social community gatherings, maybe there's an opportunity to take like 2 minutes at the beginning of each of those and just do a quick organization update. Like, here's new hires who joined the organization, or quickly, like, here's how we did versus our budget last fiscal year, last quarter or something, just to give people a little more insight. Like, maybe that's a way to do it that hopefully doesn't take too much of your time, because I know your schedule's very thin.
Yeah, it's hard to reveal information, and not reveal it because it's secret, but it opens up lots of conversations, and you want to celebrate what you've worked hard for, which everyone has, and what you want to celebrate in terms of what, how Hilltop shows up in the community, whether it's how you take care of your employees, or how, why the tenure is what it is, because of that experience as an employee. And so I think that those are really important to share, but it's also something that to Darcy's point, a way to share it in smaller snippets so that we get kind of those touch points, but not really an opportunity to kind of delve into the details or have the chance to critique. It's nice to know, and it's nice to appreciate, because otherwise, as a parent, our focus is just in the classroom. And it's nice to support an organization that cares for those that work for the organization.
Thank you so much. Can we give them